The shell gave way after the first few pushes. Breath-moving light stretch! It felt its way free, escaping out into the hatchery. It was caught up in moments by a larger. Hands held it firm to chest as it was carried into another room, and sat down in a row beside a dozen others that looked identical. Its brothers were all looking up. It turned and looked to see what was mesmerizing them. The wall. It was covered in beauty. Circles, lines, colors, concepts that a moment before hadn't existed came forth in his mind. Gold on a field of blue swirling filled up his periphery. Thought forced itself into his newborn mind. He was a creature of the wall, a scribbler. The Great Mother birthed him and awaits him to give service to the colony. He looked away from the wall, and as he did, waiting arms grabbed him. Gently they lifted him, cradling him in their arms. He was held by an older brother, a nurseman. The nurseman carried him to the next room and sat him down. He looked around at the other newborns. They weren't sitting but moving around the large room, taking in visions from one wall after another. He followed suit and walked up to the first wall and looked at it. The patterns etched into his mind a story of his people. Immediately a division was formed. His people were the smaller, the hunted, the castaway. The others were the predators and drove his people into hiding. They were large, full of fangs and muscle, eating them. His people traveled stars as they hid amongst the largers. Successful colonies grew and sent out princesses to hid in the bellies of other ships. Walls would be cut in hidden spaces for the youth. The elders would record great events, strategies, techniques, anything that could benefit the colony. This continued for time beyond time. The struggle to grow while hiding. The keeping of walls while keeping them hidden. The strategy for their people was to grow in hidden places from the largers. He took it in, concepts filling his fluid mind. He shook a moment and then walked to the next wall. He focused his eyes and let the images roll through his mind. This wall was a story about a larger, different from others, and a colony that made a difficult choice. The people had settled into a habitat, hiding in vast unused chambers. A mother had nested, and a multitude of workers had been birthed. Then a new type of larger stumbled across one of their walls. It was a vital wall, a record of records, and its loss would set back the development of the colony to the beginning. The elder male, rather than have the pack hide and scatter, chose to attack and defend this valuable wall. They won. They pushed back the larger. Fear swept through the colony. The larger knew of them. They were soon to be hunted. They were soon to become food for the largers. Yet no hunt came. The larger returned and helped them, offering food, offering them lodging, and in turn started the transition into the great colony of Twain. The young scribbler looked around the room. He put his hands on the floor and felt the vibration of faraway machines moving. A thought came across him. "Where are we?" A nurseman looked over at him, grinning a toothy smile with shut eyes. It moved him over to the next wall and pointed. "Look, brother! Keep learning!" The little scribbler stared up at the next wall, letting the glyphs form images in his mind. Tales of scribblers battling in armored suits nested in his memories. Lawyers battling in courts of law on their hovering trays filled his mind. He saw the notations of legal precedent, and his arms filled with memories of soldier battle forms. He took a step back and looked down at his 2 hands and 4 legs. He crouched down, flexing his fingers, feeling the crunch of bone through the metal suits of the knights of old. The nurseman knelt down beside him. "You all right?" He looked up at him. "Yeah, but it hurts." The nurseman patted his head. "Where does it hurt?" The young hatchling touched its chest. "Here, I don't feel good." The nurseman pulled back a bit. "Why do you think you hurt there?" "It feels bad thinking." He looked up at the nurseman. "I didn't like thinking about killing those creatures." The nurseman smiled its full set of teeth. "That is good. At least you know you don't want to be a knight." The hatchling shook his head. "No, I don't want that." It stared at the nurseman. "I get to choose, though?" "Of course, little one. Let's finish this room first. I want you to see all the guilds. Then I'll take you to meet the colony." He patted him again on the head. "We're all eager to see which guild you wish to join." The hatchling turned and walked toward the next wall of glyphs. 3 walls later, the hatchling hopped over to the nurseman. "Finish the room. Can we go meet the colony?" The nurseman looked around the room at the dozen other nursemen and hatchlings. "Yes, they're not all ready yet. I'll take you now, though." He lowered his arm around the hatchling and picked it up. "Come on. I bet you're hungry, too." The hatchling clapped its hands. "Yes, I'm very hungry." "Oh!" "What is there to eat?" The nurseman started down the tube-like hall. "Well, there is all sorts to eat. We love to feed you little ones. There is meats from 100 worlds, salads from plants grown in water or in space stations, and some from dry, arid worlds, and they crunch in your mouth." The hatchling squirmed in his arms. "Let's go! Let's go!" The nurseman squeezed him tight, patting his chest. "We're almost there." He turned and walked into a large cavernous room. "Here we are," he said as he sat the hatchling down. The little scribbler looked out across the room. Hundreds of small ones like him were in the middle fighting and eating from 100 bowls. He looked up and saw even more elder scribblers looking down from seating positions cut into the walls. He stared up at them as he walked toward the food feud. He paused and watched the other young ones fighting and scrambling over pieces of meat and fruits. He reached down and grabbed an empty bowl, lifting it tight to his chest. He slowly walked around a fight over a piece of leg meat as big as he was. He reached over two of the contenders and pulled a strip off of it and put it in his bowl. He then walked through the mess of salad and hatchlings eating off the floor. He picked up a few red fruits and green leaves and placed them in the bowl with the meat strip. He dodged a piece of food flung through the air and walked over to the corner of the room, where he sat and started eating. He shivered as he took his first bite. His mouth salivated, sending a wave of shakes through his body. He wanted to devour the whole bowl, but then he looked at the mass of hatchlings fighting and eating. He took a breath and restrained himself, taking one small bite at a time. After he finished the bowl, he went back and refilled it, pulling different meats and fruits from around his fellows. Again he sat in his corner and sat, eating and watching. He was on his fourth bowl full when an elder opened a gate at the edge of the room and stepped in. "Hello, young ones. Welcome to life." Hundreds of hatchling eyes looked up at him. The young one in the corner took another bite and watched him. "I am a representative of the Knights of Twain. I have seen in many of you the fire and drive needed to be a soldier, and I stand here before you to ask, would any of you be willing to serve your people in combat?" Dozens of hands shot up. The elder walked through the horde, patting them on the head. "Come then. There is much more food to be had. I'll take you all to the temple and we can start your training." The elder turned and walked back to the gate, the volunteers following eagerly behind him. He sat, putting in another bite of sauce-covered plant into his mouth. The others in the middle started talking and looking up at the guild elders. He took another bite and looked around at the elders as well. He looked over the glyphs carved under each sitting area. Images flooded his mind as he took them in. There was the lawyers, the nurses, the knights, the explorers, and the builders. None of them appealed to him. He sat and ate, watching as elder after elder came down and took a host of hatchlings. Nursemen kept bringing more in to feed and be selected. Eventually another elder from the knights came and took another 20. Still he sat, eating and watching. After another elder came and went, he got up and walked over to a nurseman who had just dropped off 2 hatchlings. Excuse me." "Yes, young one? Where do I go?" he asked. The nurseman smiled. "Well, go with whatever guild you wish to join." "What if I don't want to join any of those?" The nurseman lowered himself to look him in the eyes. "What do you mean? You don't want to help the colony?" The hatchling shrank a bit. "No, I do. I want to help, I just don't know where I belong." "That's simple. You chose a guild. You will belong to that guild." "I don't like those guilds, though. I don't feel like I fit in them." The nurseman thought for a moment. "Come with me, then. Let us figure this out." He led the young out into the tunnels, but took a different path than before. They reached an organic door, and the nurseman pressed onto it. It sprang open and a rush of hot air hit the hatchling in the face. The two stepped out into a massive expanse. Largers strode past them, towering as they stepped by. "Where are we?" The nurseman patted him. "Be quick, go where I go. Don't get squashed." The nurseman held his hand and darted across the space. The hatchling held tight, following as quick as its tiny legs could patter. After dodging dozens of moving feet, they reached the other side of the concourse. The hatchling looked back, noting lights and what appeared to be shops for the largers. "What is this place?" The nurseman led him along the wall. "We are in larger space. Don't worry. I'll keep you safe. Just walk with me." The nurseman ducked into a hole torn into a vent. The hatchling followed. The air was warm and moist in the metal tunnel. He ran his tiny clawed finger along the metal, etching a line as he kept pace with the nurseman. They turned and continued down several long stretches before entering a tunnel that was 4 times as tall and wide. The hatchling paused, staring. The walls stretched in both directions beyond where he could see, and every inch was decorated with glyphs. He turned and looked at the nurseman. The older scribbler smiled down at him. "The Hall of Histories. Go! Learn! Maybe something will spark your mind here." The hatchling took a step away, staring at the older nurseman. "Don't worry, young one. I'll wait here for you. Go, learn. Let's find where you are supposed to be." Life stories. They were all stories, old ones, jotted down as they neared the end of their lives. Glimmers of thought, memories, battles, and experiences flooded the young one as he went from one set of glyphs to the next. He saw the thoughts of a pilot who explored on vessels with Fuimos. He gained an understanding of the camaraderie of fighting alongside your brothers and the largers, defending the worlds they live on. He learned of places inhabited by traveling scribblers. There were worlds of water, of ice, of molten rock, and others of beasts and jungles. The universe opened up, worlds opened up as he read. Many stories carved in many different times detailed the Sam. Other largers were mentioned, many over different times as well. The largers were near immortal compared to him. They lived long like the mothers. Reading about them sparked a thought in him. He walked back to the nurseman. I found a clue I wish to follow. The nurseman sat up, munching on a few squishy eyes. Oh, you did? That is a good thing. What are you thinking? He looked back at the hall. I love this, all of this. These stories are amazing. There are other halls on other worlds like this. The nurseman nodded. There are many more here on this station, very far from where we are. Other colonies have history tunnels just as long as this one. I guess other worlds would have some too. I want to find them, the young one said. Well, there are teachers in each of the guilds. You could maybe be a legal teacher, a logger of precedent. What guild is in charge of these halls? Do the explorers go and catalog them? The nurseman shook its head. No, they work on freighters, travel with the ships looking for new colony sites. How many sites do they find before they get old? Well, 1, maybe 2 if they are lucky. The hatchling sat down beside the nurseman. That's what I thought. We don't live long. I don't think I'll be able to do what I want. The nurseman looked at the sad little hatchling. You want to go out and learn all our histories? That would take many, many trips. The hatchling nodded. The nurseman stood up. Come down this way. There is one you need to read. The nurseman led him far down the hall to a set of glyphs and pointed. Look at that one. He did. It was a glyph carved by a scribbler like him who didn't fit. He spent his days observing and learning what he could to help the colony. He found a larger who kept and manipulated life. The scientist HFY watched the one called the Preserver and documented in detail genetics and how the science worked. The hatchling soaked it in and then turned toward the nurseman. He was like me. He wanted to learn. The nurseman nodded. Yes, and because of what he learned, other new ones in the colony, like you, may have a chance to help the colony themselves. I don't understand. The nurseman patted him again. I've looked over other gene logs by HFY. The largers grow big and live a long time because their genes tell them that is how they should be. We are small and live short lives because our genes tell us that is how we should be. That one, the Preserver, still walks the same chambers. He can change life with his magics. Maybe rather than joining a guild, you should take the name HFY. The hatchling looked down at his hands. Takukli. I think I should be a Takukli. The nurseman squeezed him in a hug. Takukli is a good name. Let's go get you fed again and I'll help you find your way to that larger. Takukli stood up taller. Thank you for helping me. It is my chosen path. I thank you for being my brother, the nurseman said as he took his hand and started walking back to the colony.